Hi everyone, and thank you for joining this presentation. My name is Rachel MacKenna and I work as a wildlife campaigner at the Environmental Investigation Agency. Today I'm going to be presenting a little bit about the Selous Game Reserve, which is a UNESCO World Heritage Site situated in southern Tanzania. So before I kick off to outline the key threats and the key challenges facing the Selous Game Reserve, I just want to quickly introduce the Environmental Investigation Agency for those who are unfamiliar with us. We're an international NGO based in the UK, but also in the US, and we focus on investigating and campaigning against environmental crime and abuse. We've got different campaigns that focus on the protection of wildlife, including different species such as elephants, pangolins, and big cats, as well as campaigns on forest protection, climate change mitigation, and the protection of our oceans. My presentation today, as I mentioned, will focus on the key threats and challenges facing the Selous. But by way of background, I should mention that EIA has had historical involvement in Tanzania, most recently in 2014, when we conducted investigations into Chinese-led criminal syndicates that were involved in widespread elephant poaching and ivory trafficking in and out of the Selous. And this led to the loss of 67% of the Selous' endangered elephant population in the space of a few years alone. But more specifically on the Selous, due to ongoing security issues in Tanzania with regards to freedom of the press and freedom of expression, we became heavily involved in the campaign against the hydropower dam that's known variously as the Rufiji Hydropower Project or the Stiegler's Gorge Dam. I'll just refer to it as the hydropower project in this presentation. But we got involved because, as we do not have a presence in country in Tanzania, we use this to our advantage to allow us to speak up on issues that many local stakeholders actually were being threatened with jail time for speaking up against. So you may recall in 2018, the then Environment Minister Kanji Lugola told Parliament that all those who opposed the hydropower project would be jailed. So today, EIA is very grateful for the opportunity to speak about the challenges facing the Selous Game Reserve, and I'm grateful for this platform to be able to do so. So without further ado, let's make a start. There we go. So this presentation will be a short summary of the threats facing the UNESCO World Heritage Site, but I'll situate it amongst the many recommendations and decisions that were adopted by the UNESCO World Heritage Committee over the years in light of the construction of a hydropower dam in the heart of the reserve. So I'll start off by situating the Selous historically within the UNESCO framework before diving into the key concerns that face the site. I'll then highlight and showcase the many expert findings by the IUCN and the decisions adopted by the UNESCO World Heritage Committee to showcase how the Selous' precarious situation has really been discussed over and over again over the years, but how in fact very little action has been taken to protect it. Towards the end of the presentation, I'll just quickly touch upon what EIA is doing outside of the UNESCO arena, just by way of an introduction, and I will of course provide my contact details in case of questions and comments and any type of follow-up. So the Selous Game Reserve has been listed as UNESCO World Heritage since 1982 for its abundance of wildlife mainly, of which many species are endangered. The reserve itself is vast. It spans over 50,000 square kilometers, and it actually is one of the largest protected areas on the African continent. There's one of the highest concentrations of globally significant populations of elephants, black rhino, cheetah, giraffe, hippo, and crocodile, and many other species. And the area is also home to a very high variety of habitats, ranging from woodlands to grasslands, from forests to swamps, etc. So it's really got unparalleled ecological and biological functions. And it really is for this reason that back in 1982, it was designated as a Natural World Heritage Site. So just quickly, for those who are unfamiliar with the UNESCO listing procedure, sites must be found to adhere to certain criteria to be given World Heritage status. So it has to meet certain requirements. And in the Selous case, criteria 9 and 10 under the convention are relevant in this case. So the Selous was found to contain outstanding examples representing significant ongoing ecological and biological processes, but also, and this is criteria 10, it contains the most important and significant natural habitats for in situ conservation of biological diversity, including those containing threatened species. So in addition to the revenue generation, the revenue, generated from tourism in and around the reserve, the Selous is equally important for other reasons, notably through the generation of livelihoods for local communities through fishing and farming. So, for example, the Rufiji River, which snakes through the reserve, feeds really an important fish, shrimp, and prawn industry in the delta and offshore. And as we'll see, over 200,000 people's livelihoods are now being put at risk due to the damming of the Rufiji River. So what you see here, unfortunately, are the many threats facing the Selous Game Reserve. I briefly mentioned at the start of the presentation that the area experienced rampant elephant poaching approximately 10 years ago, which led to the loss of over 65% of the elephant population of the reserve. And it was for this reason, and of course the knock-on impacts on the wider ecosystem, that the Selous was first placed on the UNESCO list of World Heritage in danger, and this was in 2014. And in 2018, the impacts linked to the construction of Stiegler's Gorge, mainly through the logging and the deforestation that had already started, these were added as a justification for retaining the Selous on the list of World Heritage in danger in 2018. So what we've seen really is since 2018, the construction of the dam has really accelerated in the last few years, despite repeated calls and warnings from UNESCO, from IUCN, from foreign embassies and NGOs such as ourselves, that the outstanding universal value of the Selous, the ecosystem of the Selous, would likely be damaged irreversibly by the construction of the dam. And what I mean by consequences is, they range from habitat loss to species decimation through flooding, through increased poaching to the site, because the site is going to be opened up through roads, and it's going to become more accessible, so poachers therefore have more access to the endangered wildlife. And this all obviously includes the beleaguered elephant population that I referred to before, but the consequences will also have huge knock-on effects also on the fishing and the farming and livelihoods of over 200,000 individuals. So national media report actually that the reservoir will be filled in a couple months' time, starting in November 2021, just around the corner. And they are setting their sights on completing the dam next year in 2022. And this is worrying on so many levels. So firstly, Tanzania undertook this project in full knowledge that dams were incompatible with World Heritage status. The UNESCO World Heritage Committee and the Center repeatedly recalled this in various meetings, but Tanzania took no heed. Then the project was initiated with environmental impact assessments and strategic environmental assessments that IUCN went on to characterize as wholly unfit for purpose and inadequate. And later on, though UNESCO repeatedly requested Tanzania to invite a mission to the site, what they call a reactive monitoring mission, which is necessary to assess the impacts of the construction in a non-biased way, Tanzania continuously failed to do so and hasn't done so up until today. So what we're seeing essentially is that Tanzania has continued to stall, to buy itself time to continue with the construction of the dam in violation of its many commitments to UNESCO and to environmental protection. I need not actually remind you, I guess, that Tanzania committed to not undertake development activities in the Selous without the UNESCO committee's approval. So essentially what we've seen is overall Tanzania has, throughout the last decade or so, pursued unilateral action to construct this dam. It's ignored scientific and expert evidence, and it's violated its own commitments to national and international laws and frameworks to do so. I should mention also briefly that we've been extremely concerned with the government's authoritarian approach to civil society opposition to the project, as I mentioned earlier. And this was especially relevant under the Magufuli government, Magufuli, who died in a couple months ago now, where under his rule, under his office, prison threats, intimidating language, military patrols at the site were really the norm. And it's just goes to show that, you know, in 2020, the US government issued a public statement highlighting that freedom of expression in Tanzania and democratic norms were really under threat in the country. And Tanzania's ranking in the World Press Freedom Index had never been lower as it had been under the Magufuli office and government. So it's really been quite a complicated and very damaging and worrying picture that's been painted throughout the construction of this dam. And on a wholly separate note, I should also mention the construction of the dam has also underscored the need for greater scrutiny in the financial investment sector. And I will speak about this in more detail towards the end of the presentation when I cover our EIA's campaigns. But just to touch on it now, it's emerged that several international financial institutions hold shares in a number of companies involved in the construction of the project in Tanzania. And excuse me, obviously as shareholders in these companies, such investors are supporting the project through their financial ties. And this is an aspect that EIA has been looking at increasingly in the context of sustainable finance and corporate social responsibility. So over the years, the UNESCO World Heritage Center and the UNESCO Committee have made a number of key recommendations, and they've adopted decisions that speak to the seriousness of the current situation of the Selous. So since 2012, at least 9 decisions have been adopted by the UNESCO Committee, all relating to the Selous. And these, excuse me, these decisions vary from reminders to Tanzania that dams are incompatible with World Heritage status, to, you know, decisions that inscribe or retain the Selous on the list of World Heritage in danger. And there have been numerous expressions of concern that the dam is going to have devastating consequences for the integrity of the site, for its wildlife, for its environment. And should it continue, the Selous really will be stripped of its World Heritage status. There have been numerous warnings. Unfortunately, though, what is most apparent over the years is the committee's more recent failures to instigate any real action to hold Tanzania to account for its actions in the Selous, and for, you know, for holding it to account for ignoring its international commitments under the UNESCO Convention. So a few months ago in June 2021, just before the 44th session of the UNESCO World Heritage Committee, the World Heritage Center published a draft decision calling for the Selous to be stripped of its status, and this was monumental. It pinpointed the damages that the dam was causing to the outstanding universal value of the Selous Game Reserve. It pinpointed Tanzania's repeated failures to observe previous and historical UNESCO decisions and recommendations on the matter. And this draft decision was something that EIA as an organization stood firmly behind. And it's something we actively campaigned for, and we lobbied committee members to adopt and to vote this draft decision. And the reason being, from our perspective, you know, enough was enough. UNESCO and IUCN had repeatedly advised against the dam. They'd made multiple requests over the years for a monitoring mission to be invited to the site to assess damages. And unfortunately, Tanzania just chose instead a path of, you know, unilateral action to just erase the outstanding universal value of the Selous. So we were of the opinion that inaction at this most recent meeting, committee meeting, would really give Tanzania a free pass. It would really sign a death warrant for endangered species in the reserve. And above all, it would set an awful precedent that would allow similarly precious, ecosystems that fall under the UNESCO World Heritage Sites to be opened up for unsustainable exploitation. Excuse me. So unfortunately, though, despite strong interventions made by the Norwegian delegation at the most recent UNESCO committee meeting, we were very disappointed by the other committee members who chose really to reject the centre's recommendation to delist the Selous. And in doing so, they just completely absolved Tanzania of its responsibility in damaging the Selous. The outcome of the meeting, very little change in essence. It was just that the Selous remains inscribed on the World Heritage and Danger List. And a close eye will be kept on where the project goes from now on. But I will recall that the reservoir is meant to be filled in November of this year. So, it was truly a missed opportunity for the committee. They could have sent a clear and unambiguous message to Tanzania, to the international community, and that includes financial investors. They could have sent a message that the destruction of UNESCO sites of ecological importance is unacceptable under the convention. But really what came to pass was, I guess, a political showdown whereby the majority of committee members just chose to ignore the best scientific evidence available to them. And, at the meeting, it was shocking to see how some committee members went so far as to present misinformation, to reject the centre's recommendations. Some even went so far as to attack ICN and others who raised concerns about the dam. So clearly, the decision-making process at the UNESCO committee meeting, at least in this iteration of the meeting, unfortunately, was not led or informed in any way by evidence or procedure. The political nature of the meeting in the end meant that Tanzania was let off scot-free. It was let off the hook. And in doing so, it set a devastating precedent for World Heritage. One also last thing I should say on this UNESCO meeting was the apparent lack of respect for civil society at the meeting. So EIA and our partner Rivers Without Borders Coalition, we were given the floor to make a very short intervention, but we were only allowed to do this only after the decision had been put to the vote. So this meant that we were really actually not given an opportunity to inform the committee prior to the vote. Which begs the question, obviously, I'm sure you'll agree with me, of what use civil society is at these meetings, and worse still, why were we actually being sidelined, and why were we forbidden from having a say in, from having a role in presenting critical information and viewpoints to state parties to inform their decision making? So in a nutshell, this most recent meeting clearly set a precedent that is very worrying for the future of UNESCO World Heritage sites, but also the convention. And it's something to bear in mind because next year we'll be approaching the 50th anniversary of the UNESCO convention. So it's clearly a pivotal moment and a desperately missed opportunity of the UNESCO committee to showcase its teeth, to showcase its value in upholding the convention. Conscious of time, so I'm just going to move on quickly now to touch upon what EIA as an organization has been doing outside of the UNESCO campaign. We've been monitoring the situation for a few years now in the Selous, and once the construction contracts were awarded to El Suwaidi Electrics and the Arab contractors, both Egyptian companies, we chose to dig a little deeper into the financial investment side of things. And the main takeaway from this exercise, at least to me, has been that much greater scrutiny is needed in this sector. During our research, we found that a number of institutions who are internationally active, and they're big names, have shares in the construction companies or the banks that are backing the project. And as a result, we can say are contributing, therefore, to the destruction of our shared world heritage and environment. So on this slide, you can just see a list of some of the investors we've engaged with over the last couple of years. I will note it's just a very small snapshot of those we were in touch with. The list is much longer. And And I guess most shocking of all, we discovered that a number of investors were flouting not only their own corporate social responsibility policies and commitments to sustainable and green finance, but also their commitments that they made to UNESCO explicitly themselves. So for example, we found Standard Chartered, mentioned here in this table. They have shares in one of the major banks who provided a financial guarantee for the project to get off the ground. And they did so despite having made a very public commitment in 2018 to the UNESCO World Heritage Centre that it would not finance projects that in any way, shape or form could harm World Heritage sites. I'm sure you see the irony here as well as I do. And it's something that we are actively engaging in. We are actively promoting sustainable finance, and we're actually promoting corporate social responsibility through our engagement with a number of these banks. And just to comment quickly on the other banks that feature in the table, we've been in touch very briefly with American investors BlackRock and Vanguard. They may ring a bell for some of you who've been, some of these BlackRock and Vanguard's ventures have been flagged by a number of NGOs for being involved in unsustainable ventures. But it really isn't, it isn't all doom and gloom, I should say. I mean, this presentation has been quite heavy, I understand. But on the whole, there are signs and glimmers of hope. We've had some successes on the financial investment outreach side of things, mainly in Scandinavia and in Northern Europe. We have Swedish and Norwegian banks that have divested already from Elsewhere Electrics and United Bank for Africa. And we know of a Dutch capital management entity that divested United Bank from Africa. So these investors all quoted the Refugee Dam as justification for withdrawing their shares. And going forward, as an organization, we really see great value in continuing to engage investors on this issue. A lot of the conversations we've had have been constructive for both parties. And it's something that I think will only increase in importance as the world tries to become more green and more sustainable. And we also plan to engage a bit more with UNESCO and future UNESCO committee meetings to urge the committee really in future to adopt a decision, financial related decision, to encourage institutions and such as banks, insurers and investors to adopt and to implement commitments to refrain from directly or indirectly financing projects that could harm UNESCO World Heritage sites. So in a nutshell, that's what we've been up to, but safe to say we still have a lot of work ahead of us. Just to wrap up then, the Selous Game Reserve is an outstanding place of natural beauty and of key ecological and biological processes. It's not for nothing it was recognized as World Heritage by UNESCO, but it is deeply concerning to see that the UNESCO World Heritage Committee continues to treat Tanzania's defiance of the convention so lightly. And the precedent set at the most recent committee meeting places other natural World Heritage sites in real danger. And it really is a space that we need to keep a close eye on.